For those that don't know me, I'm Elaine O'Neill. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Farm Forestry Association. And today we're going to talk about an evaluation of what has gone on in the last 20 years in response to the Forest and Fish Law and how it affects small forest landowners. To provide some context, just want to give you just a short summary of what has happened in the past, now 22 years practically. The Forests and Fish Law legislation in Washington was passed in 1999. It had 4 key goals: to maintain and restore salmon stocks, maintain the economic viability of the forest sector, including small forest landowners, meet endangered species requirements, and maintain water quality. At the time that it passed, economic evaluations recognized there was likely a disproportionate negative impact on small forest landowners. Therefore, the legislation had a built-in requirement for periodic trend analysis of changes to small forest land ownership patterns and demographics. It also required periodic evaluation of, and I'm going to give you the quotes here, from the legislation: whether, how, and to what extent the Forest Practices Act and rules contributed to those trends, and whether, how, and to what extent the board and legislature implemented recommendations made in the previous report, and the implementation of or failure to implement those recommendations affected those trends. So that's the legalese. Of course, like many laws, this one came with a mandate to evaluate these impacts, but no funds to do so. Ultimately, the first Washington State Forest Land Database was completed in 2007 at the University of Washington College of Forest Resources. It was funded by a congressional appropriation supported by Washington Farm Forestry Association advocacy. That database has been tremendously useful over the years. It's answered all sorts of questions about small forest landowners, but also about other resources. But it was out of date. So in 2019, on the 20th anniversary of the passing of the Forest and Fish Law, a Washington Farm Forestry Association worked with the Washington State Legislature to pass Senate Bill 5330. And that bill was to fund an updated spatial database that could be used to develop a trends analysis and to evaluate the impacts of the Forest and Fish Law on small forest landowners based on 20 years worth of data. At the time, WFFA viewed this as critically important, as we had heard from our members over the years about how forest and fish regulations and lack of funding for mitigation measures were impacting them. We heard about decisions to develop because forestry was no longer a viable land use. And we heard about elderly landowners whose heirs didn't want the hassle of trying to make a go of it in the face of such a high regulatory burden. But we didn't know to what extent these impacts were felt and what kinds of public policy levers might be used to address them. We also realized that small forest landowners span a tremendous diversity of perspectives and goals, so it was important to capture and evaluate that diversity. So the presentations you hear today are the synthesis of an 18-month effort to meet the intent of Senate Bill 5330. The work was completed at the University of Washington School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. And I have to say, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village of scientists with a diversity of expertise to answer the complex questions posed by Senate Bill 5330. So I have to say, we are absolutely delighted to welcome 3 key scientists from that team that will walk us through what they learned, what they can say with confidence, and what they can't say from the data they gathered for this project. I'll introduce each scientist as we move through their presentations, but to start, first up will be Luke Rogers, then Sergey Rabyatagov, and he's going to correct the way I say his name, and I apologize, Sergey, and Brian Danley in that order. First up to discuss the database is Luke Rogers. Luke is a research scientist and forest engineer for the Precision Forestry Co-op at the University of Washington School of Environmental and Forest Sciences in Seattle. Since 2001, Luke has worked to quantify the geography of Washington State's forest land base, culminating in a first of its kind in the nation, and maybe the only one in the nation, a forest land and biomass database for Washington State. He did that first in 2007. And I have to say, we are so grateful to have Luke's expertise on this project, as he and his team have this, deep knowledge and understanding of what's gone on before and how that's changed. And they ensured that they were comparing apples to apples in this trend analysis. So with that, Luke, take it away.
Thank you, Elaine, for your kind introduction. Let me get this started here. Well, good morning. Like Elaine said, my name is Luke Rogers, and I'm a forest engineer by training from the University of Washington. Got a couple of degrees from there, and fell into the GIS trap as an undergraduate student. Really got into the idea of trying to help Washington State's forest landowners with technology. And so it's been a wonderful journey that I've been on this past 20-some years. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and present this to you today. Sergey, Brian, and I have split this into kind of 3 sections in the presentation that we're going to give. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we developed the data, give you some numbers on the sort of census and trends that we're seeing. Sergey is going to do a deeper dive into a lot of the trend analysis and share with you some information from some previous surveys that we did 10 years ago, and looking at the fate of some of those landowners, and just kind of do a deeper dive on the trends. And then Brian's going to share with you results from the surveys that were sent out that have a lot to do with the current policies and landowner attitudes and behaviors. So with that, I will get right into it. This data set is built using county assessor parcel data. So we go to each county, each of the 39 counties in the state, and we request from the assessors all of their tax rolls, as well as the GIS parcel layer. That's the spatial data that we use for a lot of the analysis that we do. There is one county that is not included. That's Whitman County. They're still working to get theirs built, which is quite an expense and effort, but they're working on it. So we were able to get the spatial data from 38 counties. So Whitman's just kind of missing for now, which is unfortunate. Although we do have the tax roll information associated with, so we do have some numbers for that county, but we can't do any maps and a lot of the kind of spatial things that we like to do. Into that, we integrate the stream and riparian management zone data. So we add in the kind of state regulatory buffers and fish streams and steep slopes and a bunch of other sort of political overlays, things like legislative districts, and we put in watersheds and all this kind of stuff. So basically we build this massive set of related tables in a big database. And then we also integrate forest cover data from remote sensing. So using the Landsat-based assessment. So from satellites, we're able to look and see where the forest cover is, and so that's overlaid as well. So by using the forest cover from the satellite imagery, and by using the land use that the assessor has used for the appraisal, by using those 2 things, we can tell where forest lands are in the state. And we go all the way down to 1 acre parcels with a ½ acre of forest land. For all of our reporting, we use a 2 acre parcel with a 1 acre of forest land, but we do actually map all the way down to those 1 acre parcels. So we've done this a few times. We did it first in 2001, responding to the creation of the Small Forest Landowner Office in the DNR. They were sort of mandated to produce this report that Elaine referenced about status and trends of small forest landowners every 4 years. And so the Department of Natural Resources asked us to try and take a stab at this, which we did. That was headed up by Steve Stinson at the time, and he knew of me and some of our skills at the university, and so he asked us to do that work. So we did kind of a non-spatial version in 2001, and then, like Elaine referenced, we built another one in 2007, and then we've kind of had some partial ones for various projects over the years. Anyway, it's been the foundation for a lot of different projects, not only the parcel database, but the Forestland database as well. It's used by dozens of agencies and on hundreds of projects. Really didn't anticipate the total utility that it would have when we built it the first time, but it's become quite a valuable data set. So it's nice that we were able to update this. And I will say one other thing which is pretty cool that happened with this Senate Bill 5330 is at the same time the Puget Sound Partnership funded a project that we've been proposing for them for years, which is develop an agricultural-based database for the state to do the same thing that we're doing with forestry, to look at status and trends, but to do it with ag lands. That got funded at the same time, just coincidentally, and so we were able to build sort of an agricultural companion to this, which is pretty cool too. So now the ag community is starting to see some of the same benefits and information that the forestry community has had for some time now. This is what the land base looked like in 2007. So again, we're able to quantify everything in here. So we've got industrial landowners, we've got the small forest owners, we've got state lands, Forest Service, federal, county watersheds, county forest lands. So we're able to map that across the whole state. And then of course, now we're able to do that again in 2019. So, you know, things have changed a little bit. The eagle-eyed and you may have seen some of the changes over there in the Tianaway Community Forest, how some of the things have transitioned via TANM. So you can see some of the kind of larger transitions zoomed out to the sort of state scale here. So this is what Elaine likes to call the $1 million map, which it really was the first time we built this. Didn't cost that much to do it this time because we knew better what we were doing, and the data is a little easier to get, but it's quite an endeavor to put this all together. The idea when we started working on this is that we were going to take the 2007 database that we had. We were going to take the new 2019 data that we had assembled, and we were going to look at the change between these two things. We started to do this and started noticing that there was a much larger conversion away from forest lands than we were expecting. And this, we had some idea from previous studies that we'd done about what we thought the sort of annual rate of loss to non-forest lands was, and we were seeing much bigger numbers than that. And we started digging around and discovered that the way that the forest was estimated from satellite imagery, the way that the federal government was doing it with their National Land Cover product changed. And so everything we had done in 2007 was no longer comparable to 2019, and so we weren't able to do trends using that original database. So not only did we have to build this 2019 data set, we had to go back and completely redo what we did in 2007. So it ended up being literally twice as much work as we were anticipating. Fortunately, we were able to do that. So we've got exactly the same methods in both data sets, so we can be very confident in the changes that we're seeing by comparing these two data sets. Another thing that Sergey is going to mention in a minute was that based on that 2007 database, many years ago, we had some research to look at basically willingness to pay. So landowners that, you know, how much could you pay them to retain their land, or if you had some sort of easements in place or development rights, you know, temporary purchases of development rights and things like this. So we had a survey that went out back in 2009 assessing a lot of this based on the Forestland database. So we were able to send surveys to specific types of owners that had specific acreages or that were sort of on the developing edge of things, and so there was maybe some concern that they were going to convert their land, or at least have some more pressure to than things that were further away from the sort of urban fringe. So we were able to send out all of these surveys. The cool thing is that now 10 years later, we were able to go and look at the fate of all of those parcels. So we were able to look at people that were concerned about development, whether or not those things actually developed, and whether their concerns, whether we could see those in the data over that intervening 10 years. So pretty cool thing that we were able to do that's really not been done anywhere else that any of us are aware of. So a pretty neat opportunity, which again, Sarah, I'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay, so numbers. One thing that's going to be, I think, confusing for some folks and probably frustrating is because we had to go back and redo the 2007 data, the numbers changed a little bit. As I said, they changed the methodology for the forest assessment and how they identify forest land from satellite imagery. I will say it's much better now than it was before, so we agree with their new methodology. It does appear to more accurately capture forest. It's not, there was a lot of, sort of a few trees here and there on an agricultural property over in the Columbia Basin that were showing up as little forested pieces. That they no longer do that. So it is a much better assessment. So some of the numbers that we're used to talking about from that we've been using for the past 10 years when we describe small forest landowners have changed a little bit. Just putting that out there because I know that will probably cause some confusion for some folks when we're looking at some of these trend numbers. So it's about 3 million acres of forest land on about 5 million acres of land. Western Washington, you can see the numbers here. About half of it, half of the forest acres, 3/4 of the owners, and about 3/4 of the parcels as well. Which that makes sense. There's just a lot smaller parcels on the west side, a lot of because of the parcelization due to development and a lot of these rural homes where people have a house on some portion of their property and then the other 4 acres are forested. So those kinds of things show up in the data. So we see that reflected here. And I will show you in a minute here, but we have numbers and they're not even statistics. These are it's a full census of the entire population of forest in the state. So we've got spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet of numbers that I will show you how to access in a minute here. So you can do a much deeper dive into all these numbers than I could possibly do on a presentation like this. Okay, so what has changed? You can see here that there's more small forest landowners now than there were in 2007. But the size of the small forest landowners has decreased some. So we've got more parcels, and in all the size classes we look at, so we kind of break things up by 5 to 20 acres, 20 to 40, in this. The numbers of owners in each of those classes has all gone up. The largest increase that we saw in terms of land uses on those small forest lands was the big increase in residential land use classification. So a lot more of these parcels that used to be classified as vacant or designated forest land or any of these other sort of categories where we tend to see a lot of forest land on have decreased, and more of them have moved into this kind of residential tax category. That doesn't mean there's any less forest on them. It just means that the assessors and their appraisers have changed the way that those things are being viewed. So a few less acres. So we saw a decrease of about 200,000 acres on parcels and about 100,000 acres on forest. This is about what we expected. Typically, in a typical year, there's about 30,000 acres of forest land that gets converted to non-forest in Washington State, which is an area about the size of the city of Seattle, and a fraction of that comes from the small forest landowners. So this is about what we expected to see. And in terms of these changes, I should say that it's more complicated than you might think. So if this 210,000 acres is what is called a net change. So there is a lot of acres that went out of SFLO lands, but there's also a lot that has come in. And so these charts on the bottom, which are too small for you to read and see, and I wouldn't expect you to try, basically show the categories that are going into SFLO and out of SFLO, so you can see what this net change is. And the simplest way to describe it is that there's a lot of industry lands that are transitioning into small forest landowner lands, and then there's small forest landowner lands that are transitioning mainly into residential. All of this can be mapped, of course. So on our website, which I'll show you in a second here, you can get maps for every county in the state. We have maps for industry lands, and we have maps for small forest landowner lands. So this is a change in land use or owner for small forest landowners. So in this map, you can see here the dark blue were small forest landowners in 2007, still are in 2019. Light blue have actually been acquired by industry, or the owner itself is bigger now and qualifies as an industrial owner rather than a small forest landowner. And you can see some other categories here too, where things have gone to public lands or conservation. The red ones here, which have transitioned to non-forest, or the purple ones, which are new small forest landowners that were a different land use before, could have been industry. So anyway, we have maps of all this for the entire state, and you can actually look and see what the exact mechanism is of change. So on our website, which I think I can pull up here. So on our website at the University of Washington, this is right on our homepage at the very top is a link to this 20 years of forest and fish. And in here, you can see the bill that was the enabling legislation for all this, and a little bit about the team that worked on it, and a few highlights from the report. But at the very bottom, you'll see the report itself, and then we've got a number of spreadsheets here that have data from 2007, data from 2019, then the change spreadsheet, so you can look and actually see what has changed. And then we also have a sort of a legislative reports edition that was designed specifically to answer the questions that the legislature asked of the Small Forest Landowner Office in the Salmon Recovery Act enabling legislation. And then down at the bottom here, you'll see there's also all of these maps for, again, 2007, 2019, looking at ownership, and then also the change between 2007 and 2019. So lots of data here. If we look at one of these, just so I can show you they're not that scary. And we tried to make them as approachable as we really could. So let me just open one of these up so you can see what's in here. Sure, you won't be able to read any of it, but second here. On each of these spreadsheets, I will say there is an introduction that has information about how to use it. It has information about how we define some things that are in the following pages. So it's good to read because it describes how we define things and really helps you understand what each of these sheets are. And on all of these tabs down on the bottom of the spreadsheet, you'll notice there's tables in each of these. So we have statewide numbers. So this is SFLO by size class across the state. So average parcel acres and number of owners. And if you scroll down this page, you get sort of increasing levels of resolution. And this is true for all the tables in this spreadsheet. So here we have statewide. Next, you'll see county. And if I scroll way down, you'll see we get down to the water resource inventory areas. And if I go even further down the page, it goes all the way down to the watershed administrative units. So this page goes on and on and on, describing all the various characteristics that we can see from the parcel data and from the Forestland database. So I just want to make you aware that these are there, and you can feel free to play with them on your own. Okay, but one other thing before we get to this next section that I was going to show you is, so this is the actual view into our database. So this is some of the mapping software that we use. On here, you can see all these green lands. This is around Chehalis, Napa Vine, Mossy Rock area. You can see all the small forest landowners here highlighted in these green parcels, and then the brown and the orange are federal and state and such. Each of these parcels has a lot of information associated with it. One of the things that we can see is sales, for example. and we have this by date. So all these yellow ones are ones that have transitioned over the past between 2007 and 2019. So they've been sold. We actually know what the mechanism of those sales are, and we actually know the date. So we can actually map over time here and see when these things have been sold. So we can move our little thing here so we can actually see by date, when these things have been sold, so we can see how the landscape is transitioning over time. We can also look and see properties that have been inherited. So here down on the bottom, you can see some of these pink ones. So we can actually tell from the instrument that was used to do the sale what type of instrument it was, and there's an indicator in those as to whether or not it's inherited or acquired through a divorce, and there's dozens of these categories. So it's pretty interesting. So for doing landowner outreach and education, this presents a real opportunity for some of the extension courses on ties to land and some of the forest legacy kind of outreach and education programs. So pretty cool opportunity to specifically target with educational information different types of landowners. I think with that, I could. There's so much more information, and it's just kind of impossible to get at it all. I will say I know there's going to be some questions, or I hope there's some questions about things that are relevant to Washington Farm Forestry's current endeavors to get some new regulatory relief, or I'm not sure the right way to put it, but things like on cumulative effects. Can you tell what the total impact in a particular watershed might be from harvesting? What's the can you see trends in the data? And the answer is we can. Some of it. It's a little tricky, especially with harvesting, because we cannot get the harvest data from the Department of Revenue. It's protected because it's got tax information in it. So we actually tried to work with the department to get that, and weren't able to. So we can only really tell if somebody's applied for a forest practice application. We can't actually tell if they've gone and harvested, at least not from the data that we can get from the state. So in order to do those sort of cumulative effects kinds of things, we actually have to go in and use remote sensing and look at annual time steps and see where harvests have actually occurred and where they have not, and correlate that to the FPAs that are being submitted and figure out how to do it that way. So that is something we have not done. It certainly would be interesting, but we haven't been able to do that. And I will say there's a lot more information that we'd like to analyze in this data. We know there's so many more questions that can be asked of it, and so many things that we can answer that we haven't answered in the report. And we really hope to get to that in the coming years. And so I guess we'll just say we know there's a lot more that we'd like to do, and we're looking for opportunities to do that.
So Luke, we just had one question come in for you. How do we access the mapper tool that you were displaying? I'm assuming that's a GIS thing, so it's not actually accessible, but where are we with that?
So our plan is to do that. We're hoping to put up actually not just maps, but sort of a data portal that will allow you to do some more advanced queries than you can do in the spreadsheets, and make it a little easier, so it'll make nice graphs and charts and stuff for you. So we're working on that. And we also are working on getting this data up into an online map tool. We have not done that yet. We've kind of been swamped with some other projects that we had to ignore while we were working on getting this project done. So we're playing catch up on those, and then hopefully we can get back to this and get this stuff online so people can play around with it a little bit more. So
do you have an estimated time on that? Just putting you on the spot here.
It would be after June. So probably this summer, it would be our hope.
After June before you start, or after June before you think you'll get it done?
It'll be after June before we get it done. We got some end of biennium deadlines and things that we're pushed with right now. So yeah, we'll have it up this summer.
Okay.
But in the meantime, you can always, ask us for stuff, and if it's easy for us to pull it out, we can do that. So.
Okay.
Luke, this is Ken. A question I didn't put in the chat box, but was a big takeaway that you said, and I didn't quite catch it all. you made a statement, something along the lines of about 30,000 acres per year get converted. And what percent of that is typically forest land? I didn't quite catch that.
That's that's the amount of forest land that's getting converted to non-forest use. So it's not necessarily cover related. It's a change in the kind of primary use of the land.
So
And that's all across all owners, not just small forest landowners. That's just statewide across, everything.
okay, so that's all land that's being developed per year in round numbers, some of which is forest land.
All of which was forest land. Some of it still is.
Oh, okay.
So it's covered by forest. It's just the primary use of it has changed to residential. So it might still have some forest on it, but it's now sort of classified by the assessor as a residential property. And these are round numbers. They fluctuate, but it's roughly what it is statewide.
Okay, thank you.
Luke, may I ask you a question? This is Vic Musselman, past president of WFFA.
Yes, please.
You just made that statement again of acres that were converted to residential. So I'm assuming part of that is small forest owners that had a small forest parcel, but finally went out and built their residence on it.
So that'll be some of those, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So does that mean, when I think about the way that the Thurston County where I am, how they deal with it is, if you build on forest land, you can have designated forest land, but if you put a house on it, they take an acre away and say, that's your residence. So is that 30,000 acres just that 1 acre piece, or does it convert to, say, the whole 5 acres?
It depends on how the assessor classifies these things. So the assessor has kind of a primary land use that they designate. I don't know how they make the decision as to whether or not the primary land use is forest. In a case where it's a 5 acre parcel, 1 acre is a home, 4 acres is forest. I don't know. I'm sure it differs by county. That would be something we'd have to do more work to sluice out of the data. But the assessors, they do it differently, and it's not just by county. It's when a new assessor comes in, they also change how they do it. So it's not consistent.
Lovely.
Okay. Yes, this is why assessors are elected, because you can move things one way or another.
Well, we can call it job security for us to say, figure out how to answer this question, because we have this question about development, and it sounds like it's not as simple as just looking at these maps or looking at 2 points in data, because you might be measuring apples to oranges.
That's right.
All right, super. Any more very brief questions before we move on to Sergey's presentation?
Vic, I'd like to ask one more question to Luke.
Yes.
So you do not, in your database, have broken out how many parcels have had that have had a residence put on them. You just know that so many acres have been converted to residential, but you don't know how many small forest owner parcels actually had that happen on them.
We can tell we can tell 2 ways if structure was put on the property. So one is if the assessor adds a residential land use code to the parcel. So we can tell that. So we can see that there is that change. We can also tell by looking at the value of improvements on the property. So if we see that there was, maybe $5,000 worth of improvements back in 2007, might be something like a gate that gates off the road, or might be a septic system that's in anticipation of developing or something. And then we can see in 10 years later, if that value now has gone up to $200,000 or $300,000, we can make an assumption that a structure was built that is maybe a vacation home or is residential. So we do have that data, Vic, and that is something we can quantify.
But you can quantify the number of parcels that's happened to.
Yes.
That would be very good information, actually.
It might even be in the spreadsheets that we already have. That's something I can follow up with you on, though. Happy to. Longer.